Good afternoon, intuitives. Not working a double, so I want to do a video on something that's been on my mind. And this video is actually geared more towards ENFJs and to a lesser extent INFJs. And I want to talk about ENFJs and INFJs being unifiers and bringing, for lack of a better term, people of different cultures, clans, and tribes who have similar beliefs and want to change the status quo in similar matters, that ENFJs and INFJs must be of all different backgrounds and genders and everything, must be the one to bring these groups together to form a united front against the status quo and the old boys club. And this is primarily a job for ENFJs, particularly ENFJ females, due to their very charismatic and empathetic nature and ability to relate to like a lot of people and get people to trust them and open up, because in my experience they're very trustworthy, and they're fine with being not only in a leadership role, but also ENFJs are fine usually with being in a spotlight. INFJs, by contrast, though we like leadership ourselves, we can only tolerate being in a spotlight for a limited amount of time. We much prefer to be the number two in an organization instead of like the person who is front and center and the face of it. INFJs are better lieutenants than leaders. We're really good at being lieutenants. As I've joked on here before, I would make a terrible king, but a great prince consort for the right queen. That spot's still available, by the way. Any queens need an INFJ prince consort, demisexual, you know, ex-firefighter who stands up to bullying and hazing and writes poetry. No takers? Okay. Back to my point. So, bringing people together for a common cause is what needs to happen to affect real change. The frustration I've felt for the past decade and a half about how slowly things are changing is because no one marginalized group on their own has the numbers to outtake the status quo in the old boys club. So all of us, that broadly speaking call ourselves progressives, be it, the LGBTQ community, the Jewish community, the black community, the Hispanic community, not saying it's limited to them, but those are just examples, including but not limited to the witchcraft community, which is very small. We're like 0.6% of the population, so we certainly can't do it on our own. These groups that have a lot of common beliefs need to be unified together and stop the infighting, because only together as a united front will we have the numbers to really affect change. And it's difficult because everyone by nature has some sense of like tribalism, where they relate to people best of their own backgrounds and own life experiences, and different groups face different challenges. There is a lot of overlap between these groups, but the challenges and prejudices that these various groups face on certain issues are to different degrees depending on the group. And we need to stop fighting amongst ourselves, saying who had it worse in what respect and at what time, because that just keeps us fighting amongst ourselves. That doesn't, help us come together to affect real change. And I know there is infighting between various, progressive groups, various cultures. We need to table that for another time. The old saying of, take care of your common enemy and then go back to fighting amongst yourselves. We're not going to get real change until we do this. ENFJs, like I said, being very empathetic, arguably the most empathetic, and their natural ability to be leaders, are the main people who need to help and speak out, and come into these leadership positions. If ENFJs in, all these marginalized groups and cultures decided to speak up and tried to unite with other groups and cultures with similar goals politically, I think that's how we're going to get real change. And of course, as INFJs, we should be their lieutenants. Our intuitive nature is very, very valuable in situations like that, particularly for perhaps younger ENFJs who can be a little too trusting and struggle to say no, and can want to believe the best in people and think they can change them when they sadly cannot. So by doing this, we will finally get the change that we all want. And the first step is speaking out. Until we speak out, nothing will change. You have to point out the problem first and foremost. I've said it before. And as INFJs and ENFJs, we need to be the leaders in that respect too, speaking out against any abuse we have suffered, basically making it acceptable to speak out against those actions and change the status quo of, oh, it's just par for the course, it's not that bad, everybody goes through it, just get over it. Boomer logic. So even though it's terrifying to speak out, speaking out has to come before unification. People must first become comfortable to speak out. And that's changing in some respects on some issues, but certainly not to the degree that it needs to be. And we need to stand up for each other. People that have been abused, abuse victims, people of marginalized groups need to not only speak out for their own, but we need to speak out for other groups too. Like, for example, if you're a pagan witch like me and you faced prejudice for that, and perhaps even bullying and hazing, we need to be the ones to speak up for other groups. Like, we should be speaking up against anti-Semitism because we face similar prejudices from the same people simply for our religious beliefs. That's just one example of the things I'm talking about unifying groups that have similar political goals. It's the only way. Everything going on, with the racism that's completely out of hand in the American police force. If you believe it's wrong and you're white, say something. Don't let it just be the African American culture that's speaking up. Yes, they're primarily the ones facing this abuse and these wrongdoings by the police force, but other groups need to speak up and say, no, this is not going to be tolerated anymore. While I personally agree there is a need for a police force for certain aspects, I do completely agree that the police has become way too militarized and needs to be demilitarized and needs to have training in different diversity cultures and more diverse members of forces, particularly in areas that are predominantly of one culture. Having more members of that culture will not only be good for the community, but it'll also be good for those wanting to speak up about crimes because they may feel more comfortable speaking up to somebody from their own background. And that's, to some degree, human nature. But we need to stop stereotyping people and judging them based on their race or their sex or their sexuality, etc., and listen to everybody's story when they try to speak up and not just try to lump them in like stereotype profiles, like, oh, this is a typical, feminist argument, this is a typical black argument, this weird witchcraft guy, we don't even know where to throw him, let's just call him crazy. So we need to back each other. And there needs to be leaders from all these groups saying, hey, we all need to come together, because without coming together, we don't have the numbers. To change the status quo and to end the double standards and everything that the old boys clubs are clinging on to with all their might. All these different groups that essentially want the same thing have to come together as a unified front as once, because not one of these groups, be it, the LGBTQ community, be it the feminism community, be it the witchcraft community, be it the African American community, the Hispanic community, the witchcraft community again, the Asian community, others too, not limited to those, but those are examples. None of those groups on their own have the numbers to affect the status quo to the point that we want to. By coming together, we show the status quo in the old boys club that more people are against them than with them, and more people want change and don't want things to stay the same. And that's why they try to keep us fighting amongst ourselves. Obviously, there are some legitimate arguments between different groups, but the status quo, the old boys clubs, the people that want things to stay the way they are, try to focus on them to keep us fighting amongst ourselves instead of unifying against them. So my ENFJ friends, again, this is your big task in all these groups, to step up and be the leaders that help bring these groups together for a common cause. And us INFJs, we're more than willing to be your top lieutenants and do what we can, mostly behind the scenes. We'll do, we'll go in the spotlight a little bit, but that's draining for us and we need time to recover, and it's just how we are. Never downplay, or suppress your empathetic nature. If somebody comes to you, INFJs and ENFJs, because people are usually very comfortable in opening up to us rather early on in meeting us, listen to that person. Listen to their story. Do not brush it under the rug just because they may be implicating somebody powerful or famous or somebody who has status in the community. That doesn't absolve them. And even if you may think, oh, this person would never do that, people lie. People are frauds. People are abusers. Eventually get very good at their craft and learn how to cover their tracks and know how to brown nose the right people to get away with things. Encourage that person to speak up. If you have a similar story, tell them yours. Some people aren't willing to speak up until they talk to somebody who's been through something similar. If we do this, more people will speak up. There'll be more understanding amongst all the various groups who want to change the status quo. And I believe then and only then will we have the numbers to change things the way they need to be changed. I mean, INFJs, ENFJs, we're idealists. We see the world as it should be, not as it is. We do not blindly accept the status quo. We're not, a spoke on the wheel. We want to break it. We want to break the wheel of fate. We want to burn the old boys club down, metaphorically. You need to not suppress that you're always going to have that feeling of what can I do to help change things. You're not ever going to be able to sit back and be like, well, it is what it is. So just accept that and be a cause for good. Speak up. The challenges with speaking up, I've gone into in other videos, and they are numerous. But in the end, I truly believe it's worth it. Only by fighting the fight can we win. You can fight without ever win, but never ever win without a fight. Again, as always, never sell out your integrity. Trust your intuition. Let's help break the status quo.